and welcome to Daily Debrief from People's Dispatch. Today we examine the EU's fresh proposals for a ban on imports of oil from Russia. The United States heats up over the Supreme Court's decision on abortion, and Turkish President Erdogan announces a plan to send 1 million Syrian refugees back to Idlib. The European Union has announced a sixth round of proposed sanctions against Russia. The sanctions focus on cutting oil imports from Russia to EU countries by the end of the year. The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said Hungary and Slovakia have until the end of next year to phase out their oil imports. The sanctions do not include gas imported from Russia. The three banks, including Russia's biggest, are also being removed from the SWIFT system, along with three Russian state-owned broadcasters. A Russian leader has said Europe will simply continue to buy oil via other countries. In a related development, Russia has also issued a warning to NATO against sending arms to Ukraine. We have with us Prabir Purkasa for more. Prabir, first of all, is there enough oil in the world to make up for oil from Russia?
Well, it's because of that they are actually phasing out the sanctions, saying that, okay, 6 months, 1 year, some countries, till next year. So it's clear that they do realize that a sudden shift of supplies is not possible, A. B, whatever target the OPEC had to increase its supply of oil, that it has not been able to fulfill. Oil is not going to be that simple. You just turn the faucets on, you get more water. It's not going to be like that. Okay. So effectively, a lot of preparation has to be made. Yes, there is oil available, but to get that out of the ground, of course, you need to prepare for it, make the infrastructure available for the increase. Some countries can increase more easily, Saudi Arabia, for instance, and also Russia. But other countries can't. So therefore, the whole idea that the sanctions are being configured in a way that it will not hurt most of the world, particularly the countries imposing the sanctions, but it will only hurt Russia, is a complete mistake. We've already seen the price of oil in the global market is also rising because of that. But the crucial issue is not simply the price of oil. It's simply, are there enough supplies? And can it be ramped up the way the sanctions are proposed to be done? Who will be hit in this? Leaving out the price issue, the real issue is, for instance, if we don't have enough oil, some countries are going to be hit more than others. What will happen is those who have fat wallets will probably survive better, but their economies will tend to get hit. But a lot of the poorer countries are going to be hit because they don't have either access to oil or the amount of money required to buy that oil today. So all of this does mean that we are looking at a scenario not simply of shortages, but of absolute shortages, not relative shortages. A part of the impact we have not seen because the United States has released what it calls its strategic reserves into the world market, and particularly for friendly countries, and that will keep the supplies at a certain level, probably till about September. So it's not going to continue because they don't have infinite storage either. The strategic reserves will then have to be filled, which means they will then get into either the market or increase domestic production to fill the strategic reserves they are releasing into the market. But what I see is absolute shortages, rise of prices, and a huge impact on the global economy. The European Union appears to be willing to cut its own nose to spite the Russian face in this particular case. But I really don't understand why they're doing these kind of measures, which in the sense is only going to make this problem of peace in Ukraine more difficult, rather than approaching it that asking Russia to surrender because you have certain amount of economic power is not going to work. That's visible to everybody. Russia is better placed to maneuver a lot of these things because they're relatively more self-sufficient as an economy than European Union is. So I really don't understand what European Union thinks that it is doing, except they've ratcheted up the Ukraine issue to a level where they sort of have bound themselves to a trajectory which means collision with Russia.
Prabir, what will be the impact on the economy in the EU and also in the rest of the world of this round of sanctions?
Let's see what happened when this Ukraine issue started and there was a clear danger of Russian energy supplies not reaching the global market. Sanctions obviously is one of them. The financial sanctions also imposed by both the United States and European Union also playing a major role in that, because most of our transactions takes place internationally in dollar, because it's easier to denominate transactions in dollar because that's a reserve global currency. Therefore, instead of all trying to calibrate every transaction in our respective currencies, it's much easier to denominate it in dollar. That's the reason that United States dollar being the reserve currency, it plays this role. So what happens is once the sanctions have taken place, you can't even do this. So you need to have, say, ruble rupee exchange mechanism. These are all new mechanisms that have to be set up in place. So we are seeing two issues. One is a shortage of oil, which is, or energy, gas also, but also how to then transact business with all the sanctions that are there in currencies which are not euro, not dollar. So that's the second problem we are getting. Because of this, we see the absolute shortage that we talked about. Because of that, we see the oil prices rise. If you take 1 year back, the oil prices were lower by about 65 cents. I will put it the other way around. Oil prices have risen by about 65 to 70%. They were about $60 odd a year back. Now they're about $105, $106, depending on which index that you take into account. But they're likely to rise much faster if, for instance, the strategic reserves then go out of the market, they have to be replenished. It doesn't look like OPEC is able to fill the gap that is opening up. And Russia, if it also is further sanctioned, then its ability to supply either to European Union or to rest of the world will be hit because of the financial sanctions that you also talked about. So all of this is going to take a certain amount of oil out of the market, and the consequence of that is that certain economic activities need oil, need energy. They will continue to buy because otherwise their economy goes down the tube. To what extent they will be affected is a different question, but they will buy because of the other needs that oil has. For instance, you have chemical industry which is based on oil. So a lot of those industries will perforce use this as a raw material as well. So given that, I see a price rise will take place because the oil shortage will hit the global economy. Not because oil is not available, because it's difficult to buy. So therefore, the second set of issues that we need to solve, if the globe has to tide over this, is working out mechanisms which are independent of the dollar, independent of euros. And therefore, the question is, like for instance, India working out a ruble agreement, how many other countries that can actually continue to import from Russia, bypassing the problem of the currency, which is the main reason that sanctions work in this issue, because trade happens, as I said, in either dollars, mostly in dollars denominated. International trade really happens mostly in dollars. So that it has to be then an alternative mechanism has to be found to negotiate this terrain. And one of the things that we then have to talk about are alternative sources of currencies or currency mechanisms available to the world to be able to trade not in dollars, not in euros, not in pounds, but in their own currencies or something which they can use as a wire media.
Okay, Prabir, thanks very much for that update. A leaked draft of a United States Supreme Court opinion has triggered a controversy over abortion rights. The court is expected to overturn Roe v. Wade, a 50-year-old ruling that gives women the right to abortion without excessive state restrictions for 24 weeks. It has been confirmed that this draft is accurate. The ruling in Roe v. Wade struck down laws in many US states that prevented women from accessing safe abortions legally. If Roe v. Wade is struck down today, the right to abortion will be under threat in many parts of the country. Many also see a court ruling against abortion rights as a trigger for more incursions by the state into matters of personal choice and freedom. We spoke to Natalia, our correspondent in the United States, on the implications of this ruling.
There's a lot of curiosity about what the leaked opinion of the Supreme Court judge really says. Can you just fill us up with some details?
Yeah, so what the justice who wrote the draft decision actually said in the leaked opinion, it was a scathing indictment against Roe v. Wade. He said Roe was egregiously wrong from the start. Its reasoning was exceptionally weak, and the decision has had damaging consequences. So what he's essentially saying is that the ruling of Roe is shaky, according to Samuel Alito, the justice who wrote the decision, because it's based on the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, which is the right to privacy. And so he writes that this provision can only be used if it guarantees rights that are not mentioned in the Constitution, but are deeply rooted in the nation's history and tradition and implicit in the concept of ordered liberty. And what he's saying here is that the right to an abortion is not deeply rooted in the nation's history and tradition, because according to him, there's a long, he said there's like something like there's a long unbroken tradition of prohibiting abortion on pain of criminal punishment. But this is actually not accurate. Abortion was common, legal, widely practiced until around the 1880s in the United States, when it began to be outlawed in reaction to a growing feminist movement. And so he's saying that, you know, this right has no basis in our Constitution, which is very worrying, because if he is basing, according to his argument, there are lots of other rights that hinge on this idea of the right to privacy in the Due Process Clause, among them being the right to interracial marriage and gay marriage. And so he's essentially attacking a lot of important rights to a lot of different people in the United States.
Natalia, are we going to see a lot of resistance against this in the United States? How are movements going to respond to this? Because it isn't the first time that women's rights have come under attack.
Yeah. So there's already a lot of outrage. There is a large pro-abortion movement in the United States, and there has been for a while, especially in recent months. There has been a growing attack against abortion. Many say that 2021 was the worst year for abortion rights in a very long time. There were thousands of new restrictions passed. There have been thousands of new restrictions passed against abortion since Roe v. Wade in 1973, and there have been many in 2021 alone and 2022, including the Texas abortion ban, the Mississippi abortion ban, the Oklahoma abortion ban. And so ever since these laws have been passed in recent months, there has been a large feminist pro-abortion movement trying to, you know, fight for these rights. What this movement has really advocated for is something called the Women's Health Protection Act, which would enshrine the right to abortion in legislation rather than a court decision, which, as you can see, can be quite easily undermined and overturned by members of the Supreme Court. Unfortunately, conservative Democrats voted down the Women's Health Protection Act a few months ago. Many women's movements and organizations were very upset about this. Many women in the United States were very upset about this. And now with this draft decision leaked, that movement has been sprung into action again. The Monday night when the decision was leaked, hundreds gathered in front of the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C., stayed throughout the entire day yesterday. There were massive protests across the country in various different cities last night. This weekend, there are more protests being called. Unions have joined these protests as well. So there is a growing mass movement against this decision, which could become final soon, is not yet final. So the hope is that the movements and the uproar against this decision could actually sway the court. The court has been known to be swayed by people's movements. The landmark decision that desegregated schools in the United States was actually decided by a pretty conservative court in response to the civil rights movement. So this is a possibility. People's movements could, in fact, sway the decision, but it really depends on how many women are able to be mobilized by these social movements and organizations.
All right, Natalia, thank you very much for that update. I'm sure this is a story we're going to keep tracking. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
And finally, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says he now plans to send 1 million refugees back to the North Syrian city of Idlib. He says 500,000 have already been resettled in parts of Syria which are under Turkey's control. Syrians were attacked in some cities of Turkey last year. Elections are due next year, and anti-refugee as well as anti-Arab sentiments are rising with the economic crisis. Turkey has received aid from the EU and other countries for hosting refugees. We have with us Abdul for more details. Abdul, why is it that Erdogan has chosen this point to make the statement about repatriating refugees and a large number of them? What is behind this?
So, the formal occasion is quite clear. There was inauguration of the houses built by the Turkish forces inside Idlib in Syria, which they had captured in 2016 and 2019 invasions. Turkish government has claimed to have built around 57,000 housing units for 50,000 plus Syrian families to basically go back and stay there. This is the formal occasion in which Erdogan has claimed that 1 lakh Syrian refugees will be repatriated to Syria. However, the real as you asked, what is the thing behind? It is quite obvious that there are elections coming, and there is a growing opposition inside Turkey about the presence of Syrian refugees there. There are around 3.6 million Syrians living in Turkey, and a large number of opposition parties in Turkey blame them for all the kind of economic and cultural issues in Turkey. So this is a kind of xenophobia. And AKP, Erdogan's party, which was initially in favor of welcoming Syrian refugees home, has basically is under pressure because it looks like that this issue will blow out of proportion and they may lose the elections next year. So that is the background in which Erdogan is basically has announced this particular policy. Yeah.
Can you also tell us what has been Turkey's role in Syria in recent years in particular?
As we all know, since the war began in Syria in 2011, Turkey has been backing the rebel forces, the so-called rebel forces. Most of them are Islamicist, ultra right-wing groups who basically opposed Assad regime on because of the backing of various international actors, primarily Turkey, US, Saudi Arabia, and UAE. So Turkey is one of the primary, you can say, the backer of the remaining Islamicists who control a major part of Syria at this moment. Idlib, as I said before, Idlib is under the control of Turkish-backed rebel forces, and Turkey is also has basically invaded Syria on many occasions in last couple of years, primarily against the SDP, the Syrian Democratic Forces, which basically has control over a large part of eastern Syria. They claim that these forces are backed by the Kurdish Democratic Party, which quote unquote is a terrorist organization in Turkey. And therefore, they have invaded eastern Syria, invaded northern Syria. They captured the area and they created quote unquote a buffer zone. So all those things Turkey is doing. Apart from that, Turkey has also been backing the forces which basically are fighting against the Assad government in Syria at this moment. So the war in Syria is prolonged. One of the reasons for the prolongation of the war is the Turkish backing the rebel forces in Syria. Apart from that, as I said, the around 3.6 million Syrian refugees in Turkey are also used. A large part of them, a section of them, have been used to fight wars in different parts of the globe. For example, Turkey, when it sends its forces in Libya 2 years back, a large part of those were rebels and a part of Syrian refugees who are staying there. So Turkey has been playing a very dubious role in Syria in last couple of years. Yeah.
And that is all we have today. Thank you for watching Daily Debrief. Please come back to us tomorrow and follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. And for more stories from around the world, please read www.peoplesdispatch.org.